All right, friends, I've got a weird one today. Secret Doors of the Earth. Jacques Bergier. I don't know if I'm saying that right because I can't speak French. The gist of the book is it essentially is trying to achieve a unified theory for all of the strangeness in the world, and by strangeness I mean the paranormal, the magic, the spiritual, all of these things. Old Jacques contended with these questions back in the day, and I'm going to go into the book, and I'm going to do this quickly and give you the gist of it. So, first of all, how did I come by the book? I came by the book by the recommendation of a gentleman named Alan Greenfield. Alan Greenfield, who I've been devouring his material since watching the Hellier series by Planet Wyrd. Alan Greenfield plays an important part in that series, and I've just been reading and listening to every bit of stuff I can get on Greenfield ever since. And so this is one of two books that he recommended on another podcast that I listened to a couple of weeks ago. So the book, published in France, first published in France 1974, then published in the United States in 1975. The author, Jacques Bergier, was born in the Ukraine in 1912. He came from a Jewish family, and they were actually, I don't know if Orthodox is quite the right word, but he was raised in the Jewish religion. Not all Jewish families are. So he was an ethnic Jew, and he was also a religious Jew. And so his family moved to France in 1925. Jacques fought in the French Resistance, which means he killed Nazis, which is pretty awesome. He was a chemical engineer as well, but he was also a Nazi-killing French Resistance member, which is pretty cool. But then he went on to, he wrote all kinds of books. He wrote this, and he wrote The Morning of the Magicians, which is a rather controversial book, rather controversial work among people who care about such things. But anyway, this book, in some ways it's a little scattered, I think by intent, because Bergier was... he just goes over all kinds of wild stories of strange things that it kind of reminds me of a John Keel book. Any of you out there who are familiar with John Keel of the Mothman Prophecies, he's not afraid to just kind of go out and be like, oh yeah, and then there was this weird story and this weird story, and in that aspect it's a very entertaining book because he goes over a lot of just really bizarre events that I had never heard of before. The book's rather old, so he's referencing some old events and anecdotes. But what I found particularly interesting in the book are two primary theses that he proposes. Both of them are fascinating, but somewhat strange concepts, or difficult concepts to wrap, at least for me to wrap my head around. Perhaps others out there would not find it so challenging. But number one, the reason why it's called Secret Doors of the Earth is that he proposes that there is, it's not so much that he proposes, because he's basically taking, like what quantum physics says about there being multiple dimensions to reality, and he's just taking that and saying, well, like, what if that's the real deal? And the way he goes into this is really complicated, or it's not complicated so much as it's just hard to wrap my mind around. It's hard to imagine. But he uses a good analogy where he says, imagine you're walking on the flat earth. Not the flat earth, but walking, you're walking on the earth and it's flat ground. And then you see a mountain in front of you. And so while you're walking on the ground, it's like you're existing in two dimensions. Once you get on the mountain, you have entered the third dimension, right? And so he's using that as an analogy to say, well, around us is that fourth dimension. There's actually probably more dimensions, but there's at least a fourth dimension. And so his point is that there is there's another physical dimension around us, which is really hard to wrap your head around. And when he's saying this, I shouldn't say, he approaches this from a very scientific and rational viewpoint. He's proposing these things as possibilities. At no point does he say this is definitive, but he's kind of saying, like, what if? So I want to present his position clearly. And so in this wild idea, there are actual literal landscapes around us that haven't been explored yet. They're on our Earth. They're around us, and they're accessible, though how we access them, we're not sure about. And it reminds me, sometime back I watched, there was a yogi in India, and he claimed, I think it was Shangri-La, I believe so, but he was talking about this mythical place from Indian mythology. I think it's Shangri-La, because it's one of those terms that I recognized immediately, and that's not my expertise, but I recognized it immediately. So I think it was Shangri-La. But anyway, this yogi, who is clearly a very intelligent man, he insisted that it was a real place, and that he has seen it, and that you can go there, and there are actual people living there. They are yogis. They are like enlightened beings, not like they are enlightened beings. So not just anybody can go there. There's some kind of weird rules to reality about how you can even see it, much less access it. And so that kind of gives some validity to Bergier's hypothesis. So that's really weird. But then you apply it where it gets even stranger, because what he talks a lot about in the Secret Doors of the Earth is that there are Earths within the Earth, which makes no sense until you accept his idea about there being another dimension, other dimensions. And so what he's saying is that you can penetrate the Earth, and if you also know how to cross over into these other dimensions, that there are multiple Earth dimensions within our Earth dimension. So it's not simply a matter of tunneling into the Earth. That I find interesting because, there's all those wild old stories, which I never really took too seriously until I read this book, and it's not like I still take them. It's not like I now take them super seriously, but it's at least I can entertain them a little more in my imagination. There's all those old stories about people finding the Darrow and all that stuff underground, and a lot of people say or a lot of people have said that under the Earth there's an actual sun. That has always seemed absolutely ridiculous to me, but after reading this book, I'm like, well, okay, I can at least see that as being plausible to an extent that I can entertain it in my imagination. So that is strange idea number one in the book. Strange idea number two, where I say that the way I look at it is that he's kind of proposing a unified theory for all paranormal and strangeness. I say that because he suggests that it's possible that the quantum tunneling effect applies to these other dimensions that are all around us. In the quantum tunneling effect, it's beyond my ability to encapsulate and explain. I'm not even sure I fully understand it correctly. It's a phenomenon that quantum physicists believe exists and is real, but is not observable. It's like one of those things that's, I think black holes are still like this technically. I don't know, maybe we've caught them on camera at this point or somehow, but as far as I know, there are things that are understood to exist purely mathematically. Nobody's actually seen them. The quantum tunneling effect is the same thing, and you can look this up. It has extensive Wikipedia page. This isn't even really a fringe thing so much in the quantum physics world. It's just considered a law of energy, or an accepted phenomenon of how energy interacts. But the basic idea is that so lower levels of energy generally do not penetrate higher levels of energy. And the example that I read was that you can imagine throwing a whole bunch of balls at a wall, and the balls are just going to bounce off, right? But quantum physics says that if you throw enough balls, one of them is going to get through. And that's where the concept gets too difficult for me to try to explain. If you guys really want to look it up, it's easy to find. But what it basically comes down to is that with enough interactions between the lower levels of energy and the higher levels of energy, there's never a zero probability of the lower energy penetrating the higher energy. there's a high enough probability, even though it may be minuscule, that if you have enough collisions of these two energies, eventually some are going to get through. Some are going to permeate this energetic wall. Or in the example of the balls, one of the balls is eventually going to penetrate the wall. And or tunnel through the wall. That's why it's called quantum tunneling. And so Bergier suggests that if we are living side by side with these other dimensions of reality, that occasionally, through this just fundamental physical mechanical phenomenon inherent in how energy interacts, it is not only possible, but it is guaranteed that sometimes the energies are going to be able to permeate, and they're going to be able to penetrate, permeate, and cross over into the other dimensions. And so the concept, the idea would be that when we encounter all these various aspects of the paranormal, whether they be Bigfoot or UFOs or whatever, that they are these things that have momentarily penetrated the energetic wall and come into our dimension, which is a different level of energy, and presumably we could cross over into theirs. And so that is what Bergier proposes in this book. It's very interesting stuff. It's really interesting too how it feeds into the Hellier series, where because they spend a lot of time going into caves and talking about the supposed UFO bases under the earth and all of that. And I should mention, Greenfield specifically mentioned this book in reference to the Hellier series. So, yeah, those are two really interesting, strange, and bizarre ideas put forth in the book. Fascinating read, great read. I love it. It's a great book. It's had me thinking quite a bit, especially the concept that there is another literal physical dimension that is all around us, but our consciousness can't perceive it. That is so strange, but fascinating and weird. And I just wanted to share it, and I hope you also find it fascinating and weird, because we all need more fascinating, weird things in our lives, in my opinion anyway. In my opinion. All right, thank you, friends. Peace out.